and special contributors to break the news to you as it unfolds.
SMBC News on Biz FM, bringing the backstory to your front headline.
Zainab Jabate, and you're listening to SMBC News on Biz FM, where we bring the backstory to your front headline.
Welcome back, and be reminded that this is the World Focus here on SMBC News, and I'm Lamin Faal presenting live from Biz FM 88. Yahya Jammeh extradited for human rights abuses. Condé met with Jammeh's host, Equatorial Guinea's Iron Fist ruler, Teodoro Obiang in Malabo, where both African heads of states agreed to protect Mr. Jammeh, who may be indicted in his country. Obiang said it will set a bad political precedent after Jammeh left power peacefully, despite a standoff that lasted 2 months. Condé also said Jammeh must be respected as a former African leader and protected as such. Gambia's parliament unanimously voted to have a commission investigate allegations of human rights abuses during Jammeh's reign. Gambia's President Adama Barrow said if the commission rules that Jammeh should stand trial, he will demand an extradition. The Gambia and Equatorial Guinea have no extradition treaty. Equatorial Guinea is also not a member of the International Criminal Court, from which Jammeh had made a bold attempt to withdraw the Gambia from, a decision that was reversed by President Barrow. Jammeh ruled the Gambia for 22 years, during which he was accused of human rights abuses through ordering the killing and disappearance of political opponents. Barrow defeated him at polls in December 2016, but no one has been brought to book for crimes committed under the autocratic ruler, though 9 of his former intelligence officers are standing trial for the murder of an opposition activist. President Adama Barrow said it was difficult in his first year in office to make an economic U-turn to uplift the Gambia from the near state of insolvency that Jammeh left the country in. He credited himself for making some progress. Foreign exchange reserves have increased more than 5-fold, tourism took a hike, fiscal discipline reinstated, domestic borrowing curtailed, and investor confidence is at an all-time high in decades. It was a very difficult year, but we have made progress. The first target we had when we came to power was to stabilize the economy and boost the reserves, said Mr. Barrow. We had found less than 1 month import cover, and now we have over 5 months import cover. International Monetary Fund has praised Barrow's government for stabilizing the economy, but unemployment and the prices of goods and services remained high. The steady decline in Gambian migrating perilously Europe took a nosedive in the first year of Barrow's rule, but experts are afraid this may be reversed again. Gambia's economy is projected to grow at least 3%, greater than the 2.8% estimated for the West African sub-region. The country's finance minister has been on a campaign to have its unserviceable international debt restructured. According to President Barrow, our progress has been praised in the area of the economy. Traffic at the Gambia Ports Authority has increased significantly, meaning people and goods are coming into the Gambia. The government's revenue has increased. The tourism sector has done very well this year. We used to have between 100,000 to 150,000 tourists in the country. This year we are expecting over 200,000 tourists, and from here we are shifting to an all-year-round tourism season instead of 6 months. The Gambia honored its former leader Yahya Jammeh, was economically and diplomatically isolated, but Mr. Barrow says the nation, with a population of fewer than 2 million people, is open for business. His administration has reduced the corporate tax to 30%, lower than most countries in Africa, to attract investors. They are on the verge of passing a new policy that requires foreign businesses to have Gambian partners. The average Gambian earns just under $1,500 a month, which is equivalent to $33 US, and a bag of the country's staple food, rice, costs more than 2/3 of this. It leaves many households unable to meet the other basic needs and indebted. As Barrow struggles with the tally, the cost of living with some of his progress, experts say it takes time to turn the economic ship around, and that they, the government, need to tell the people what they are doing and be more transparent, a step towards eradicating corruption and poverty. Dado Fadera, Gambia's chief envoy to Washington, has presented his letter of credence to the contentious U.S. President Donald Trump at the Oval Office just 2 weeks after Trump called African countries shithole. Fadera was the Secretary General and head of civil service to President Adama Barrow, also a real estate developer who surprisingly defeated Gambia's long-term dictator Yahya Jammeh in December 2016. Fadera avoided discussing Trump's vulgar comments with him while at the White House. He instead focused on keeping a cozy relationship with the U.S. after years of strained ties under ex-President Yahya Jammeh. Fadera thanked the Trump administration for sanctioning Jammeh and restricting U.S. citizens from doing business with the ex-strongman. The U.S. Department of Treasury seized Jammeh's assets for corruption and human rights abuses. According to the Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Ambassador Fadera applauded the decision of the U.S. Treasury Department to sanction the former Gambian dictator and one of his enablers for abuse of office and financial impropriety. Fadera also thanked Trump for his administration's recent decision to admit the Gambia into its threshold program of the Millennium Challenge Corporation after a decade-long suspension. The Gambia is among the African nations that expressed dismay at Trump's calling of African nations shithole country, demanding an apology. Trump has refused to apologize, partially denying he made the condescending remark during a meeting in the Oval Office. President Adama Barrow is willing to engage Equatorial Guinea's President Teodoro Obiang to have former President Yahya Jammeh return to face justice, pledging Mr. Jammeh will face the full force of the law. President Adama Barrow has asked the West African powerhouse ECOWAS to deploy more troops into the country amid efforts to overcome apparent security challenges. The chairman of the African Union and Guinea's President Alpha Condé said he will oppose any attempt to have Yahya Jammeh extradited for human rights abuses. President Adama Barrow said it was difficult in his first year in office to make an economic U-turn to uplift the Gambia from the near state of insolvency that Jammeh left the country in. That was all we have for the national news. Do stay on for news beyond our borders after the short break.
We steer essential conversations on national issues from a global perspective, even when it is difficult to read the heart of the story.
We go behind the headlines to engage and seek the voice and views of those making decisions that affect Gambian lives.
SMBC News on Beast FM, bringing the backstory to your front headlines.
Musa Balde, and you're listening to SMBC News on BSFM, on air at 88.5 and online at smbcnews.com.
Jeng, and you are listening to SMBC News on Beast FM, on air at 88.5 and online at smbcnews.com.
Welcome back, and be reminded that this is the World Focus here on SMBC News, and I'm Lamin Faal presenting live from BIS FM 88.5. And now to news beyond our borders in our headlines. Trafficking of Rohingya women and children is on the rise. Russia police arrest opposition leader amid protest. Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan to meet for Nile Dam talks. Tackling corruption topped the agenda in this year's AU summit in Ethiopia. Trafficking of Rohingya women and children is on the rise. Now rights groups say Rohingya refugees are being increasingly targeted by human traffickers at camps in Bangladesh. The situation is getting worse because hundreds of thousands of new refugees have arrived since the most recent crackdown began in August.
Oh, my darling daughter, she cries. She asks me when we talk, oh mother, what shall I do now? How can I come back to you? How will you get me out of India to be with you again? Noyona Khatun says her daughter Yasmin was 13 years old when she was snatched by a man in the refugee camp and smuggled to India. That was 3 years ago. Noyona and Yasmin fled a military crackdown in Myanmar in 2012. Noyona says the trafficker was arrested in India and Yasmin was rescued. Her daughter is living at a safe house for other trafficking victims in Kolkata. Myanmar stripped the Rohingya of citizenship in 1982. Neither Noyona or Yasmin have passports, so they cannot be reunited. Noyona says every month she saves a little money to chat to her daughter for a few minutes on the phone. Only God knows the pain I experience every day, she says. I don't have money to go to India. My daughter warns me not to try and cross into India without a passport. Noyona's story is not uncommon in the Rohingya refugee camps.
Rights groups say that trafficking gangs have thrived in the Rohingya refugee camps here in Bangladesh for years. But the recent arrival of more than 650,000 new refugees means the situation is getting even worse. Now, we met a trafficker, and he told us that men come from outside the camps. They pay Rohingya families for their daughters, promising them work, but the girls are often never seen again.
We sit by the road and the men come to us, the man tells me. They ask us if we can get the helpless type of people. Families are ready to provide girls because they don't have enough food. The man says men often specifically want girls of a certain age. He says they pay the families around 5,000 taka, about $60 for each girl. The men ask me for the girls around 12 to 14 years old, he says. They tell me they have difficulty with their domestic work at their homes. They say they need someone to cook for them. The man tells me he has stopped providing the men with girls now and only trafficked a few young women. When the parents come to find me, then I have to hide, he explains. They want information on their daughters, but I have no information. The UN's refugee agency is trying to help Noyona be reunited with her daughter, but it says only the Bangladesh authorities can make that decision. Noyona says Yasmin never met her father because he died before she was born, and she is afraid she herself may die without ever seeing Yasmin again. I want nothing more than my daughter back, she says. It would be so kind of you if you can get my daughter back. My Yasmin is a piece of my heart. Charles Stratford, Al Jazeera.
Turkey is battling to take a key mountain in northern Syria as it steps up its offensive against US-backed Kurdish fighters in the Afrin region. Turkey has accused the YPG of using the mountain to fire shells across the border into the Turkish town of Kilis.
The battle for Bursaya Mountain intensified on Sunday. The constant roar of jets and artillery targeting this important high point along the Turkish border. Explosions echoed over the border town of Kilis, drawing a crowd. A strange fascination watching the war unfold, but for some it's a little too close to home.
Even though we are here in Kilis, we've become used to this war. It has happened before, when ISIL was on the other side of the border. But I've still moved my wife and kids to another area for safety, but I'm staying.
Turkey's offensive against the YPG, the Kurdish group it considers a terrorist organization, is very visible here. It has also stirred nationalist fervor.
This crowd has just shown up at the border crossing, holding crosses in their hands. This is, of course, the official name of the operation against the YPG. These are nationalists. They are very much behind their president and in support of this operation.
Allahu Akbar.
And this is what that operation looks like inside Syria. Turkey is backing Free Syrian Army fighters, and at the moment the main focus is pushing the YPG back from the border areas. The Kurdish fighters say Turkey's offensive has caused civilian casualties. Turkey says it only targets YPG positions. But as is often the case in war, facts can be hard to come by. Turkey's leaders stress that this is only the beginning, and they intend to clear the YPG from its entire border area all the way to Iraq. But the YPG in that area further east is supported by the United States, and there are American bases and military personnel on the ground there. Relations between Ankara and Washington are already tense, and just another example of how complicated Syria's war has become.
Russia police arrest opposition leader amid protests. Opposition leader Alexei Navalny in the capital Moscow after he joined nationwide protests he organized demanding fair presidential elections. A video posted on his Twitter account on Sunday showed several policemen wrestling him to the ground before dragging him into a police box, surrounded by a crowd of supporters and journalists.
It's become a familiar routine for Navalny demonstration days. While supporters in Moscow and St. Petersburg slept, in Russia's eastern time zones, they were already protesting and being arrested. This footage is from the Siberian city of Kemerovo. And in the capital, police moved against the opposition leader's offices, this time temporarily shutting down his internet TV channel, claiming a presenter had a bomb. From a secret location, Alexei Navalny released a message of defiance.
I want to go to the rally whether they detain me or not. I want to make my position clear, and one day I will tell my children and my grandchildren, yes, I was out there to say I disagree, and all the bad things that happened to me happened while I was actively protesting. This is what matters to me most.
Then, as protesters started to gather in central Moscow, Navalny surfaced, and his demonstration day game of cat and mouse with the police reached its inevitable conclusion, bundled into a police van with his supporters chanting shame. Alexei Navalny says that his arrest doesn't matter at all, that the people who've turned out here in Moscow and all around the country are protesting for their own futures. Many in the young crowds you find at Navalny rallies have been born and grown up in Putin's Russia, and they're planning to boycott what they see as rigged elections in March.
Elections isn't fair. They are only Putin, and other candidates are puppets of Putin, in my opinion.
I haven't got my candidate because Navalny was cancelled from the election.
So if Navalny had been allowed to run in the elections, you would have voted for him?
Of course.
Few here, if any, really think they'll be able to prevent Vladimir Putin winning another landslide election victory. But as darkness fell on a cold Moscow, they kept their chants of protest ringing into the gloom.
A statue of Cuban independence hero Jose Marti was unveiled Sunday in a plaza in Havana. A gift by the Bronx Museum of the Arts and a gesture of friendship in a time of strained U.S.-Cuban relations, Cuban President Raul Castro was present at the unveiling ceremony in what is likely to be one of his last public appearances before he steps down. Relations between the U.S. and Cuba have deteriorated since Donald Trump took office.
Sharing a stage comes naturally to these Cuban and U.S. musicians. Cuba's best-known pianist, Chucho Valdés, playing alongside American jazz legend Joe Lavone. The saxophone player is among the U.S. artists who headlined this year's Havana Jazz Festival. Musicians turned cultural ambassadors at a time of renewed hostilities between their governments.
It's now more important than ever that music as a common language connects these two countries. Again, the politics are the politics, but the art form is a common language, and that will help strengthen perhaps some of the other areas of the broader international relationship.
And that relationship has deteriorated significantly since its high point 2 years ago. Today, the State Department is actively advising Americans to stay away from Cuba. But not all of them are listening. Even under tighter travel restrictions reimposed by the Trump administration, an unprecedented number of Americans visited and performed at this year's jazz festival here in Havana. And when asked why they're here, they generally gave the same basic answer.
Music trumps Trump as far as I'm concerned.
This Cuban pianist couldn't agree more. Playing for a tour of American jazz lovers, Jorge Luis Pacheco thinks musical overtures can have just as much power as diplomatic ones.
La cultura cubana y la música cubana, eso es fuego, ¿no?
Cuban music and culture is an explosion. It's fire. And that is what we transmit to the audiences. Beyond all the problems that exist, I try to express what I am, not as a musician, but as a culture.
And the cultural efforts extend beyond music. This statue of Cuban independence hero José Martí was a gift from New York's Bronx Museum of the Arts to the people of Cuba. The unveiling, attended by architects and other artists from both countries, hopes to mark the start of other joint projects.
It's always been the artists and the cultural organizations that have really kept the conversation going. They were responsible for initiating the conversation and open the doors for relationship building and greater connections between Cuba and the United States.
Raul Castro attended the inaugural ceremony in what is expected to be one of his last public events as Cuban president. Perhaps a nod of support to those trying to get the relationship with the U.S. back on track.
But some musicians and artists are determined to show that the two countries can get along.
Musa Balde, and you're listening to SMBC News on Beast FM, on air at 88.5 and online at smbcnews.com.
Welcome back, and be reminded that this is the World Focus here on SMBC News, and I'm Lamin Faal presenting live from Beast FM 88.5. Trafficking of Rohingya women and children is on the rise. Russia police arrest opposition leader amid protest. Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan to meet for Nile Dam talks. Tackling corruption tops the agenda in this year's AU summit in Ethiopia. Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan to meet for Nile Dam talks. The leaders of Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan will meet today in a bid to break a deadlock in negotiations over a hydroelectric dam Addis Ababa is building along its share of the Nile River. The dispute threatens to undermine unity at an African Union's annual gathering in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's capital.
A cloud of uncertainty hangs over the African Union's annual gathering in Addis Ababa. A dispute between some of its members over a dam Ethiopia is building on the Nile threatens to undermine unity at the Pan-African Organization.
The African Union is extremely encouraged by is that the different countries are meeting directly and bilaterally to try and sort out their differences for the situation to be dealt with in an amicable and in a direct manner between the states involved. And that is encouraging for the African Union.
But recent developments on the ground appear to suggest otherwise. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who seeks re-election, has expressed concerns over the mega project known as the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, saying it will disrupt the flow of water to his country. But the dam is crucial for Ethiopia, which is eager to become the largest producer of hydroelectric energy in Africa and whose population often struggles with a lack of electricity. Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan initially agreed on solving the dispute through dialogue. But Sudan and Egypt are now facing another crisis. They each claim rights over the so-called Halayb Triangle on the Red Sea coast between the two countries. As tension escalated recently, Khartoum recalled its ambassador to Cairo and shut down its borders with Eritrea. Sudanese authorities accused the Eritreans of colluding with the Egyptians to destabilize their country. In a move that is likely to further complicate matters, Egypt wants Sudan out of any future talks about the dam. United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres expressed hopes that countries sharing the Nile can agree on a mechanism to manage water distribution.
We believe that every problem can be solved based on dialogue, mutual understanding, technical analysis, scientific analysis, and cooperation, and I hope it will be the same. When I was Prime Minister of Portugal, we signed a water agreement with Spain that even today is considered to be a landmark.
But for now, what's happening in the Nile Basin area threatens to undermine the chances of finding a common ground.
Officials here at the AU hope differences between Sudan, Egypt and Ethiopia will be resolved soon. If not, this is an issue many worry could lead to a military confrontation. Hashim Ahbara.
Families of victims of the Kabul attack grieve over the death of their loved ones. U.S. President Donald Trump has called for decisive action against the Taliban after it claimed responsibility for Saturday's suicide bomb attack in Afghanistan. At least 103 people were killed and more than 230 others injured by explosives hidden inside an ambulance.
On a Kabul hillside, policeman Munir Ahmed is being laid to rest. He's one of the many victims of Saturday's attack in the Afghan capital. The grief is etched on the face of one of his surviving brothers. Near the blast site, Marie Shirinaga is in another kind of agony. She's clutching a photo of her eldest daughter, 12-year-old Mariam. She dropped her off here Saturday morning, but Mariam didn't come home. Her mother has looked everywhere.
I don't know what to say. She was the only breadwinner in our house. She was selling pens in the streets and she would bring the money to help raise her other brothers and sisters. She helped pay the rent. What should I do? Where should I look?
No official here knows what to tell her. And even as she searches, others are picking up the pieces. Shopkeepers remove what's been destroyed and repair their storefronts. Debris is still being hauled. Intelligence officials are accusing their neighbors of not doing enough to stop armed groups.
Today, everybody understands where the terrorism originates. It's clear where they're located, and as long as these hubs for terrorism on Pakistani soil and in regional countries are not eliminated, then Afghanistan will not reach a long-lasting peace.
The Afghan president has declared 3 days of mourning, not just for the victims of this attack, but for 2 others that have taken place over the past week at Kabul's Intercontinental Hotel and in Jalalabad, at the headquarters of Save the Children there. The president says he wants the Afghan people a chance to share the suffering of the victims of all of those attacks, and the 3 days of mourning will culminate with a National Day of Prayer on Tuesday. In the meantime, though, some Afghans are angry. Back at the graveyard, the mullah prays one day there will be peace and unity here. But the victim's cousin wants the government and its allies to fight.
We need to help the international community and the countries who are working to improve human rights. They pay a lot of attention to women's rights. But what about the rights of these people? Hundreds of young men die every day. Our blood doesn't matter?
There are calls for justice for the dead. There's already an aggressive offensive against the Taliban and other armed groups here. But many here wonder what more can be done to stop attacks like
Tackling corruption tops the agenda in this year's AU summit in Ethiopia. African leaders are in Ethiopia's capital for the annual summit of the African Union. They face a lengthy agenda ranging from appointing an anti-corruption leader, independent financing for the organization, and political and security issues around the continent.
They come together from all over the continent in the city that gave birth to the concept of African unity. The issue of independent financing for the African Union and wider reform of the organization are on the agenda. Tackling corruption in Africa will also dominate discussions here. But it's tough not to be skeptical.
We waste time. We sit here and waste time. Say it again. Because what is going to help those people in the streets there in the sun? What we are debating here, taking hours and so on.
The African Union will name President Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria as its first ever anti-corruption champion for the year 2018. It's an endorsement seen as a recognition for President Buhari's efforts in the fight against graft in Nigeria. All eyes will likely be on this man though. Rwandan President Paul Kagame will not only take over as chairman of the AU General Assembly, but is also expected to use his year at the helm to push through the agenda he developed for a more independent AU. Money has always been a sticking point at the AU. It now wants to have its activities bankrolled by its members. The self-financing scheme requires member states to levy a 0.2% tax on eligible imports to finance the union. But so far, just 21 of the 55 member states have implemented it.
Having a predictable financing for our security financing programs and also development programs is a prerequisite, which means that we need to create a mindset, a kind of spirit that the African Union can shoulder its own development programs.
2018 promises to be even more eventful for the African Union. 18 of its member states have elections scheduled, and 13 of them are either in conflict emerging from one or have a history of electoral strife.
Refugee support agencies are reporting a surge in homelessness in northern Greece. The surge is being attributed to the big rise in refugees avoiding the Greek islands and using the land border from Turkey across the Evros River into Greece instead. The main city in northern Greece, Thessaloniki, has apparently run out of room completely to house new arrivals.
People believe Pakistanis or Iranians aren't refugees, and so they cannot know what's happening in the border province of Balochistan, where these people come from. They spoke out against tribal leaders there who want independence, and they were threatened with death, so they ran for it. They crossed the Evros River from Turkey into Greece, walked for 5 days, and ended up sleeping here in Thessaloniki for months. The men had to take it in turns to stay awake to protect their wife and sister.
I felt like committing suicide. I was going mad. I thought I should have stayed in my country and let the tribes people kill me. I just wasn't expecting this at all.
Nabil got frostbite in thick snow on the river border. He can no longer bend his fingers.
I can't even go to the toilet by myself. My brother has to help me. There's no way I can work. It's really stressful.
When they took us to where they'd been sleeping, we realised we'd been here before, in November 2016. Then it was different people, all suffering the same things. That winter turned out to be the coldest for decades. Water froze in the refugee camps, and Greece's lack of preparation was exposed. A full year on, nothing has changed.
It's due to the fact that their fundamental rights are being violated. Those people don't have a house, don't have access to medical care, to accommodation, absolutely nothing.
The Belloc family got shelter 3 months ago through the Norwegian Refugee Council. Saima is now pregnant, but they're only guaranteed accommodation for 3 months more, so they could end up back here again before she gives birth. While the Greek authorities and charities try to prioritise families, single men have no chance. 1 meal a day provided by young European volunteers working off donations. And that's it.
And now a recap of our top stories on today's World Focus. Gambia's President Adama Barrow is willing to engage Equatorial Guinea's President Teodoro Obiang to have former President Yahya Jammeh return to face justice, pledging Mr. Jammeh will face the full force of the law. President Adama Barrow has seeked the West African powerhouse ECOWAS to deploy more troops to the country amid efforts to overcome apparent security challenges. The chairman of the African Union and Guinea's President Alpha Condé said he will oppose any attempt to have Yahya Jammeh extradited for human rights abuses. President Adama Barrow said it was difficult in his first year in office to make an economic U-turn to uplift the Gambia from the near state of insolvency that Jammeh left the country in. Trafficking of Rohingya women and children is on the rise. Russia pleads arrest opposition leader amid protest. Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan to meet for Nile Dam talks. Tackling corruption tops the agenda in this year's AU summit in Ethiopia. That was all we have for you on today's World Focus. Do stay on for the rest of our programs. I am Lamin Faal presenting. Thank you for joining me.